Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Dean Detloff.
And I'm your other co-host, Matt Bernico.
Matt, we've been working on a book about Christianity and degrowth for months now. Months we've been doing it. Some would even say longer than that, years of research. We've been working hard on it. We're talking about it constantly. We're working on it late at night. I go to bed working on it. You wake up working on it. I feel like we're slaving away over this manuscript. And while we've been doing that, the bishops of the Global South, they just tweeted it out. They just tweeted it out that Christians should do degrowth. And I'm really appreciative of it. I'm also kind of upset that they waited this long, because it does mean that now we have to go back and deal with it in our own book. And I thought we were basically done.
Yeah, no, it's very frustrating that we finished all the chapters and now they do release a whole big thing about it. I guess it's fine. It will make it takes our book from a very weird conversation that is like marginal and niche and does make it sort of center stage. And that is pretty cool. Too bad our book won't come out for another year, which nobody will care about it again, but that's fine.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, if we could have just collaborated on sort of a release of all of this stuff, if the bishops from the Global South could have maybe just sent me a quick email, that would have been ideal. But I guess this is fine too.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Folks, what we're talking about here, if you hadn't heard, is that there was a pretty historic document released on July 1st of this year, and it's pretty wild. It is a message from the Catholic Episcopal Conferences and the councils of bishops from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean ahead of COP30. So all the bishops in the Global South have gotten together to write one big document together. And I was saying to Matt, I don't know if this is true. I don't know if it's true that it is an unprecedented document that way, but I will say I can't think of any other documents in which all the conferences of the Global South got together and said, we're going to write this big thing and we're going to kind of use an occasion like COP30 to agree on some messaging. And I think it's pretty wild. And the title of the document is A Call for Climate Justice and the Common Home, Ecological Conversion, Transformation, and Resistance to False Solutions. And it goes way harder than it has to. I think that is pretty exciting. We'll get into it in a minute here, and we'll talk all about it. We'll talk about how all these bishops are calling for degrowth. Before we do, I do want to make one quick advertisement, which is not about our book, but about something else. And that is, I'm teaching a class about degrowth and liberation theology at the Institute for Christian Studies, and it starts a week from Monday, so July 14th. It runs Monday, Wednesday evenings, 7 to 9 p.m. online. It's a 6-week class. You should do it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I say that now, in part because I probably should have been advertising it for weeks, but I haven't been, because every time we record, I forget. But I think what I'm excited about is that it'll be a chance for people to really start thinking through degrowth and what does Christianity contribute to it. And the bishops in the Global South really putting a document out like this, I think shows how important it is for us to be engaging all that stuff. So anyway, that's the quick plug, the quick advertisement. You can go to icscanada.edu and find all the information there. You should join the class. It's going to be great. But enough of that quick commercial. Matt, I want to get your hot take of this document. What do you think about this call for climate justice?
You were saying a minute ago that you think this is unprecedented. And I've got to tell you, as a Protestant coming to this document, it seems unprecedented to me. I've never seen anything like this before in my entire life. It's pretty amazing. It's crazy. Here's what I think about it. This is like a big sweeping take from me. You know, like when you're in like nonprofits or sort of like progressive spaces, using that term in a derogatory way, sometimes you like will have to write, like messaging for things that sort of beats around the bush of the issue, where you'll talk about climate change and you'll, have to sort of make nods toward like what the issue actually is, capitalism. But you can't come out and say it because, whatever, your boss, your manager, somebody higher up in this organization than you will say, you can't say capitalism is the problem. That's too far or whatever. But that does not happen in this document. Capitalism is, in fact, the problem, according to the bishops of the Global South, which is rad. And there's something great about that. I mean, not just, I think it's great because I'm an anti-capitalist, because I'm a socialist. These things are known. But I think it's great in a real, like, strategic way, because there's a sense of moral clarity in all of this. There's no beating around the bush. There's no pulling punches. These guys are just saying, and I'm using the guys, the word guys in a very gendered way here because these are all guys. These guys are all saying that capitalism is indeed the problem. So let's stop relying on it to get us sort of let's stop relying on market-based solutions to get us out of the problem of climate change. And I think that is like extremely compelling. Man, the Catholic Church, I never expected it to once again be a sort of, at the cutting edge of a social issue, but here they are doing their thing.
That's right. For all our faults, you never know what we're going to do next. It is really neat. I mean, before we were recording, Matt was asking me about like the authority of a document like this. What does it mean? What doesn't it mean? Who has to listen to it? And we can talk more about all of that. But I think the strongest thing that it suggests to me is that there is real leadership in the church coming from the global south that is willing to push a conversation in an important and necessary direction. And these kinds of documents, there's usually a lot of cooks in the kitchen. It's not like every bishop in the global south is getting together and writing a big draft or like, thumbs upping the edits or tracking changes on a document or whatever. There's probably, input from scholars and academics, theologians, bishops themselves, people that bishops' conferences hire to help them think about stuff. But what's really fascinating is that at the end of that whole process, as Matt mentioned, they say really clearly in this document that capitalism is not going to get us out of this mess. And they connect capitalism and climate change in a really explicit way. And the fact that all these bishops' conferences, which are, a mixture of progressive and conservative people, the fact that they all, in the end, have signed on to a common statement ahead of COP30, when a bunch of global leaders who do not have a lot of good leadership, in my opinion, are going to get together and basically fail in Brazil. The fact that these bishops nevertheless got together and succeeded in a pretty big way at having some very strong language, I think is pretty impressive.
Definitely. Yeah. It is an important piece of the puzzle here that this is for COP30. So kind of getting ahead of the game. COP30 is not until November, I believe. So we got some time. They've released it so everyone can really soak it in. But yeah, it's great. The whole thing is good. I like it. I'm really excited to talk about it in more detail.
Yeah, so there are a few pieces that we pulled out. It's not a super long document, but it does have like a lot of very good quotations, so you should read it in total, I guess. It's like 30 pages or so. But we pulled out a few things that we thought would be especially relevant to the conversations we've been having on the podcast. And to maybe set the stage, I think the most interesting thing to me up front is that the document is not just a report. It's not just like a list of information. Instead, they frame it as an invitation to a historical coalition, they say. So I'll read what that says. We therefore call for a historic coalition that brings together actors from the global south, such as the church, governments, indigenous peoples, academia, social and ecological organizations, with coherent allies from all sectors and countries of the global north, committed to ethics, equity, and justice for humanity across the planet. We propose that this coalition implement ambitious actions that address the issue of debt, including historical, social, and ecological debts, promote resilience for all, and ensure a truly just and sustainable future for new generations and the conditions for life on the planet to thrive. And what I think is important about that is it's a kind of, it's an invitation. It's a call from the bishops of the Global South to not only their own people, but to the peoples of the global north to join in that kind of coalition. And I feel like it's an invitation that could get lost in the mail. It used to be the case that there was a lot of transmission back and forth between the north and south, especially mediated through the church, and there still is that. Still institutions and religious orders and news outlets that provide some of that. But as we've talked about on the show, a lot of that has kind of fragmented or gotten weaker or more muted in recent decades. And what I think is really impressive is the Global South here is issuing a really clear kind of invitation to say, like, now's the time to kind of figure out how to work together in the coming months. And I feel like that's such a cool way to frame statements from bishops. So it's not just like theological instruction or whatever. It's like, this is a chance for us to work together and to bring together the North and South to figure out how we can make a world that works for everybody. I think that's a cool frame.
Yeah, it is a cool frame. It is one that I don't know. I hope people pay attention to as an indicator of the times. I don't know. We'll see. I guess we'll see what happens at the next COP. We'll see how people, I don't know, receive this more broadly. I imagine it'll be ignored. It will be lost in the mail in a lot of ways. But I don't know. Whatever. It's important to say. People should pay attention. If you're listening to this podcast, join the coalition. Get invited. I don't know. We need some marketing, maybe some viral marketing around this. Okay, so the document is broken up into a few different pieces. Familiar with reading these types of big like reports or types of documents that are issued by organizations like the Catholic Church? They often have an executive summary, and the executive summary here kind of is pretty concise about like what's going on in this and like what is being demanded, and I really appreciate that. So in the executive summary, it has a demand. The climate crisis is an urgent reality with global warming reaching 1.55 degrees Celsius in 2024. That's actually really important. 1.55 degrees in 2024 is a big deal because the benchmark that was set off in the Paris Climate Accords is 1.5 degrees average, and just because it reaches that average in the year 2024 doesn't mean it will reach that as like an average over the course of like 2 or 3 or 5 years. 2024 was a particularly warm year because of a bunch of different weather patterns, but it's important nonetheless. And in 2025, I don't know, we'll probably be just as warm. Sorry, this is a tangent about how hot it is, but it's important. Anyways, in 2024, it was on average 1.55 degrees Celsius warmer than it was in pre-industrial times. Pay attention to that. It's important. Anyways, they continue. It's not just a technical problem. It's an existential issue of justice, dignity, and care for our common home. They continue. The science is clear. We must limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid catastrophic effects. We must never abandon this goal. It is the global south and the future generations who are already suffering the consequences. We reject false solutions such as green capitalism, technocracy, the commodification of nature, and extractivism, which perpetuate exploitation and injustice. So this is the very beginning of the document. This is like the concise summation. So you can see where things are going. It's not pulling punches. It's not like misdirecting anything. It isn't over spiritualizing the problem as being like, just greedy people doing something wrong. The problem is none of those things. It's not sort of individual choices on the lifestyle level. They are systemic problems that we have to fundamentally confront, like capitalism. We love to see it. So following those observations, the bishops say that instead of just sort of business as usual, instead of false solutions like green capitalism, they're demanding 3 things: equity, justice, and protection. So equity. Rich nations must pay their ecological debt with fair climate finance without further indebting the global south to recover losses and damages in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Oceania. Justice. Promote economic degrowth and phase out fossil fuels, ending all new infrastructure and properly taxing those who have profited from them, ushering in a new era of governance that includes and prioritizes the communities most affected by the climate and nature crises. Folks, I'm not going to edit in rap air horns around the word degrowth, but just imagine that they're there, because that's I mean, like in the past, like when we've talked about let out at sea or whatever, we're like Pope Francis was spelling out degrowth in sort of like a slanted way, but this is just, they're just saying it. They're just tweeting it out. They're just saying it all right here up front. And it's great. All right. And then finally, the last one, protection. Defend indigenous peoples, ecosystems, and impoverished communities, recognizing the greater vulnerability of women, girls, and new generations, and climate migration as a challenge of justice and human rights. Right now, the Catholic social teaching, at least in this one very, very narrow document that is from the part of the world I am not at, is making Catholicism look so inviting and so good. Like, what a great thing. I love the Catholic Church right now. This is cool.
Well, by the end, you'll convert, Matt, I'm sure, unless you go talk to some Catholics in the global north and might have second thoughts, but we'll see. The really cool thing about it as well, even in this executive summary, is that in addition to the pieces you just mentioned, these demands, they have these concrete commitments that they make. And I won't read all of them because you don't need us to like read this document to you on the podcast. But one of the most interesting ones is they say they'll monitor the results of the conferences of parties, like COP30, through a climate justice observatory. And they explain what that is throughout the document. But the idea is that they're building their own institution, a church institution, to hold global leaders accountable for what they agree to at COPs and figuring out too kind of what the, what, like, I guess who's falling through the cracks of those agreements and so on. And I think this is really interesting because in the Global South, there's a long tradition of the church creating kind of like offices for human rights documentation, for ecological destruction documentation. So I'm thinking about like the Pastoral Land Commission in Brazil, for example, which has a long history of accompanying people who are losing their land or landless workers and making sure that there is actual documentation of those injustices. And those kinds of efforts are really important when certain cases go to court, for example, or when you need to build international solidarity around something. Big companies, they kind of expect that if you're like pushing around landless peasants, that they aren't really going to fight back. They don't have any friends. They can't fight you in court because they don't have, access to like lawyers, or they expect peasants to be like uneducated or unable to read or whatever. And the church kind of, I guess, helps subvert those expectations by providing those services and accompanying peasants and empowering them to take their own destinies into their own hands. And I think that long history of kind of human rights work, kind of translating that into an institution for climate stuff in the Global South, is pretty remarkable. And it's something that the church does super well, and something that also made the church a reliable ally to people in the 20th century, especially. And to me, it is such a huge encouragement. Like, it's like easy to feel bummed about being a Christian in the Global North because the church is hard to get it to do anything that it should do. Not impossible, but hard. And sometimes I read stuff about liberation theology and I'm like, wow, imagine a time when the church was really exciting and doing really cool stuff and people in the North were like paying attention to that and amplifying it and so on. And reading stuff like this makes me really excited to be like, whoa, there's a lot of possibility to kind of revive that stuff and also reimagine what it looks like in the 21st century.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just like, I'm like floored about the whole thing and about I know I said it already, but just like the moral clarity of it. I think that is such an appealing thing in 2025, the year of our Lord, because so much of what you get from, Christianity, I guess, in the Global North is just like really wishy-washy, overly spiritualized stuff. So many people are just unwilling to actually name problems as they exist. And I think it's great when you have an institution that will actually go out of its way to do it, and then like to start building institutions around that end to hold people accountable. That sounds awesome. Sign me up. Let me come to the observatory and observe the global leaders. I would love to do that.
Yeah, look at your big documentary telescope and see what's really going on out there.
Exactly. I'll use it to see COP from a distance and to see how bad everyone's doing, and then write their names down, excluding them from the Lamb's Book of Eternal Life.
Yeah, that's why the Vatican has those 2 keys all over Rome. So the other cool thing about this document is that as they build this case for why they make these demands, why they think an observatory is important, all this kind of stuff, they go through a lot of pretty important research. The documentation and footnoting in the document is pretty fascinating. They talk a lot even about colonial wealth transfers and the inequalities of the global system. And we'll talk more about it in a minute, but I do think it's very funny. This is kind of an aside, but there is a moment where they cite Jason Hickel's stuff on the transfer of wealth from the Global South to the North. And I think that is very cool that Jason Hickel made it into a document written by a bunch of bishops, and good for him. What a great testament to his success.
Yeah, big time. Man, there's just like so much cool stuff in here. There's a heading that's called Call to Action, and this is part of what we were talking about already, but they are just full of all kinds of great demands about like really well thought out, not necessarily policy, but like sort of like things that are lurching in the direction of policy. For example, there's one that says, we demand that nature-based solutions be freed from profit-driven logic, which is awesome. I don't know if this is like quite hit the United States, or I'm sure it's in Canada in some extent, but rewilding is like a huge idea right now in ecology and conservation. And in Scotland, it's a huge deal. There's all kinds of different rewilding organizations, and they are all sort of like for-profit organizations that are trying to tell people, like how to do it, or trying to get like win government grants or whatever about how to like plant trees in the way that will stop soil erosion, or whatever, all that kind of stuff. But I love, even I guess like that seems like such a niche demand to be made, but I think it's such a good one to like just like shake off every market solution that people have to climate change, and really just like get down to the problem, which is the market solutions in the first place. Just there's just like so much good stuff in this that really tackles the root of the issue, and
it is great. Speaking of that, my cat is running around right now, so dear listener, if you're hearing my door open and close or hearing wiggling on my microphone, I guess that's just nature being nature. There's nothing I can do about that. But I think there is a lot of interesting stuff too about how the global south is being conscripted into these financial schemes of capitalism to I don't know, like figure out how to pay for its pollution. I mean, some of the obvious ones are things like carbon credits, where, a company, like an airline, you'll buy an airline ticket and they'll be like, did you know that you have a net zero airplane ticket? Which is insane. And the way that they come up with that bizarre calculation is by saying, yeah, you're going to expend a bunch of fuel for sure. But don't worry, Delta Airline has bought, I don't know, a big plot of like rainforest in the global south, and they're going to conserve it so like you can fly without feeling guilty, because that big forest is going to offset the emissions that you make by taking a plane trip. Or there's a scheme right now talking a lot about debt swaps, where like countries that are heavily indebted for all kinds of very unjust reasons already are potentially, like, the idea is that they would be offered a reduction of their debt in exchange for spending the savings, or like the money that they would spend on debt, on like environmental conservation under particular conditions and so on. And all these kinds of ways of thinking about nature are ultimately commodifications of nature. And the document goes out of its way to say that we just shouldn't be pricing things out like that. Like, nature is not like a kind of inert set of stuff waiting to have a monetary value that you can then exchange for other kinds of things. And I think that is such an important thing for bishops in particular to be saying, because I think that those are the kinds of solutions being proposed, not only at the UN and other kinds of places, but in the sort of like international multilateral spaces. Like, that's what governments tend to want in the global north. It's what companies tend to want. They want to be able to basically absorb all the world into a spreadsheet and then substitute those things in the spreadsheet so that they can keep on doing capitalism, and in a kinder way or a greener way. And I think it's really neat that the bishops are like, no, the global south should not be like made to bear the burden of, I don't know, the conscience of like consumers in the global north who want to feel marginally better about like destroying the planet.
Yeah, I mean, and even in the bit right after the sort of critique of carbon credits and financialization, they go all out and just say that they're calling for the transformation of the economic system, and it's a big paragraph. It's a big demand that they've got. But they say it's not enough to talk about an energy transition, but we propose a model aligned with planetary boundaries and the goals of degrowth. Which is interesting. They drop a few other sort of like buzzwords that are in the same sort of, rhetorical bag, like solidarity-based economy and circular economy and restorative economies, all these kinds of different things. But the really interesting thing is that there's like a critique kind of implicit in their call for a different type of economy. And the critique is that like a just energy transition is not good enough. Like that's an idea that still sort of like maintains an underlying capitalist model, a market-based model. And that's pretty cool. I mean, I think it ends up being it's such an important idea, because you can't just have a green energy transition, or maybe like it's such an important idea because from the perspective of the global south, I mean, I don't want to speak for people in the global south, but just like speaking from the degrowth paradigm, you can't have a um, just energy transition without the exploitation of the global south, while maintaining sort of a capitalist economy, because of the ways that, like, quote unquote green electricity is generated. It requires extraction from the economies of the global south, in a whole bunch of different ways, whether it's like lithium or some other rare earth metal or whatever. There's no just energy transition without the extraction of those resources. So I really appreciate them thinking this one through, because it's not enough just to stop using fossil fuels and use something else, but you have to rethink the whole dang thing, because to do so is to still continue harming the global south. So at the very end of that section, they say, we therefore demand production and consumption policies that transform production cycles and consumer culture, making them increasingly fair and ensuring that economic and energy transitions do not perpetuate the inequalities or compromise human rights or the environment. It's just so cool, because it's like, it just goes so deep. There's no stone. I mean, there are stones left unturned, but there's just like, they're not leaving any space whatsoever for sort of like market-based approaches, and they're recognizing in this the ways that those are going to, not deal with the problem, sort of.
Yeah, in fact, they have a section in here that's titled "Who's Destroying the Earth and Who is Offering False Solutions." And this is the one where I said, like, it goes harder than it really needs to. I mean, I think it should, but harder than you might expect a bishop statement to go. Here is something they say.
You're never going to guess who's destroying the Earth.
So after talking about how we shouldn't have any more fossil fuels, which is great, they say, starting in the 2000s, the narrative of sustainable development began to be replaced by the idea of a green economy promoted by some governments and multilateral agencies. The green economy, or the greening of the system as many authors call it, is a technical instrumental logic at the service of the ecological restructuring of capitalism. What emerges in the political arena is an attempt to resolve the dilemma between economic growth and environmental care by proposing nature protection and environmental policies as sources of economic growth for a few. I love it because up till now, you're like, that is like a basically neutral explanation of what's happening, and then they say for a few, which is a great signal that they're about to get really mad.
Yeah.
They say, this involves creating a legal apparatus that helps this involves creating a legal apparatus that helps to price, that is, to put a price on all of nature, which is then transformed into an asset that can be traded according to market rules among those who have access to it. However, this approach reveals limitations by reinforcing dependence on central economic paradigms, concentrating power in corporations and regulatory complexes, and deepening structural inequalities between developed economies and disadvantaged regions. Thus, the green economy emerges not as a break with capitalism, but as an incremental modernization of capitalism, expanding its capacity for self-regulation while perpetuating systemic contradictions. That is so wild. They go on to say that they oppose green capitalism, and that's great. But throughout here, you can see that there's such a really wild criticism of capitalism as such. And I think that is just a wild thing to read in a statement of all these bishops of the global south.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a great observation, a great way to put it. Karl Marx notably said that capitalism is like capitalists are the real revolutionary class, because they're able to sort of roll with punches. Any kind of new regulation or roadblock that comes at them, they're able to sort of capitalism their way out of it. And this is the observation that is absolutely true, that climate change is a real roadblock for capitalism, but capitalism is overcoming it by opening up new economies of green energy and mining and extractivism and so on. And I don't know, it's good. It's a good thing to be able to see that for what it is and not sort of buy into it. I mean, I feel like climate change in general is a thing that people have a hard time understanding, because there's sort of a bit of science to it, and not everyone, understands it, and whatever, that's fine. But it's always great to be really critical about the solutions that are being promised or being promoted, and being able to recognize if they are really solutions, or if they are just further hindrances, and they've got it figured out.
I mean, they go on to even say that they they reject capitalism and want to replace the logic of unlimited profit with integral ecology. And they go on to add to that Pope Francis proposes a system whose economy is at the service of life, not profit, that includes the poor and is based on solidarity, not competition, that cares for creation, is at the service of peace in the world, rejects armament, and is committed to reducing inequalities. And I think what else is cool is that, it's not like this document goes out of its way to say like, and we're building a socialist alternative. Like, that's not said in an explicit way.
Right.
But it's also not the case that it's only criticizing capitalism the way that you sometimes get in like liberal discourses where people will be like, well, it's just the greedy system that we have, or we just need an alternative, but exactly what that is, who could say? Or you kind of refuse to have any sort of positive move in a different direction. I think the criticism they make in this document is specific enough to tell you what it is about capitalism that is a problem, and it's the profit motive, that kind of drive for growth that can't be sated. And you can't have a capitalist model that doesn't have that kind of obsession with growth. And the fact that they're trying to like kind of create some more vocabulary to think through an alternative feels like a pretty important moment for the 21st century to figure out how do we build like public will for something beyond capitalist profit motives. And again, talking about those kind of positive values, solidarity, creation care, peace, etc., is a pretty cool move on their part as well. It's something that's like, I would say, it could land very flat, or it could be like a kind of platitude, but when it comes to the critique that they're making, it ends up having some real teeth, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Whether people like it or not is another story, I guess. Maybe along similar lines, there's a phrase that pops up in this document in a few different places that I thought was actually really interesting. And the phrase is "happy sobriety." So the degrowth discourse has a lot of weird detractors. We've talked about this on the podcast before. Lots of people who like to say degrowth is this or that, who have, I don't know, who are acting in bad faith oftentimes. I don't need to go into it any more than that because that'd be a big tangent. But one of the criticisms people often make of degrowth is that there's like a sense of like self-denial that's involved in it, or a sense of like austerity that you have to sort of accept, that like the consumer goods, our pattern of consumption and production, are the things that are sort of fueling an unbalanced world that is causing us to speed past planetary boundaries or whatever. So in response, we have to sort of accept a life of like monastic sort of quietude, where we just have to be really happy with we can't have Nintendo 64, we have to have ball and stick or whatever. I'm sorry, stick and hoop, whatever the old timey sort of Victorian kids were playing on the streets.
That's
you have to have stick and hoop, not Nintendo 64. That's true. Happening firmly within a capitalist world, so guilty of all kinds of decadence like peanuts and Cracker Jacks. Crazy. But in this document, some of that gets worked out through this term happy sobriety. So in the document itself, it says, we affirm the urgent need for a structural transformation of the way we live in order to combat global warming. We reject false solutions and promote happy sobriety and ecological conversion as the foundations for society that respect and care for the environment. So I thought that was pretty interesting. This is a phrase that actually comes from Pope Francis's Laudato Si. He uses the word sobriety quite a bit, and then the word happy sobriety kind of comes in like one really particular place. But I'll read it. We can maybe think through it a bit. So Pope Francis says, once we lose our humility and become enthralled with the possibility of limitless mastery over everything, we inevitably end up harming society and the environment. It is not easy to promote this kind of healthy humility or happy sobriety when we consider ourselves autonomous, when we exclude God from our lives or replace him with our own ego, and think that our subjective feelings can define what is right and wrong. I think that there's something very cool about this idea. It's a very, I think, mature way to think about the world. where maybe we the reason that we don't want Nintendo 64 isn't because it's like too decadent or something, but because there's like there's no solidarity in the sense that it relies on, you know, X, Y, and Z types of extraction or something to get it. Yeah, I don't know. There's an approach here to that question of like, how do you live a life that is more simple, while not like going too wild with the self-flagellation or something that I kind of like with all
Yeah,
of this.
actually, so I went back and read some of that to see after reading this because that concept, happy sobriety, is something that I guess I just didn't think about at all when I was rereading it. And there is so much
Yeah,
interesting stuff
yeah.
in it. So in sections 222 to 224, Pope Francis talks about it, especially in this big piece on joy and peace. And I'll just read a little bit from it because I think it helps to fill out what's going on and offers some more stuff for Christian degrowth. And you'll find this very wild, Matt, right off the bat. He says, we need to take up an ancient lesson found in different religious traditions and also in the Bible. It's the conviction that less is more. A constant flood of new consumer goods can baffle at the heart
Hey,
and prevent us from cherishing each thing in each moment. Uh, I'll say more, but just funny that he's using the less is more framing already, something I, for whatever reason, just had never clocked.
the gospel according to Jason Hickel. Thank you.
Exactly, yeah. He says Christian spirituality proposes a growth marked by moderation and the capacity to be happy with little. It's a return to that simplicity which allows us to stop and appreciate the small things. And he goes on to say such sobriety, when lived freely and consciously, is liberating. It's not a lesser life or one lived with less intensity. On the contrary, it's a way of living life to the full. In reality, those who enjoy more and live better each moment are those who have given up dipping here and there, always on the lookout for what they do not have. They experience what it means to appreciate each person and each thing, learning familiarity with the simplest things and how to enjoy them. He goes on to say a lot more about all that, but I think that it actually is worth kind of taking the time to parse that out. That there's a kind of like degrowth spirituality at work already in Laudato Si, and this document from the bishops, it tries to activate that spirituality in a kind of political program, which I think is a pretty fruitful observation on their part.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Something that is kind of cool about the use of the word sobriety here too is that, I mean, sobriety, right? It's a state of non-drunkenness, a particular type of wokeness, where you're not sort of weighed down by other chemicals, I guess. But in the way that it's being set up in Laudato Si and also in this document too from the Global South bishops, it's that like the sobriety is sort of the idea that like, we are not autonomous. We are sort of like, you know, living lives that are reliant on other people, and sort of recognizing that like, you know, to keep the world alive, we should probably live in this different way. But it also implies that like the drunkenness, if there's like if there's an opposite, there's like a sad drunkenness is like the sad drunkenness of thinking that like, consumption is sort of like going to get us to the place that we want to be, that we are sort of like not bound to the planet, we're not bound to other people. There's sort of a drunkenness of our own, I don't know, our own ego, that we can just sort of like do whatever we want. And I think that is actually a really helpful sort of framework to sort of work out exactly what it means to reject a lot of the stuff of capitalism that seems like really important to people, like the freedom of having all kinds of little like gadgets or whatever is really just stupid. It's like drunkenness, I guess, you know, sort of like a a sloshing around the world, thinking you're in charge, but you're really just like bound up with all these other things.
Yeah, I mean, man, there's so much to say about Laudato Si, but elsewhere in that encyclical, Pope Francis talks about how things kind of like hold a command over us in this really Baudrillardian kind of way. I won't get into it, but man, just a great kind of encyclical if you want to talk about degrowth, to think through all the ways that capitalism also ruins our own lives and how we need to do something different. Talking through the degrowth bit, maybe as we're getting toward the back third of the episode here, there is a big long paragraph or section where they talk about degrowth, also in the context of things like the energy transition. And I thought maybe we could kind of read through it, and I'll just like pause at a couple moments instead of reading it all at once, and we can
Yeah.
talk it out. But I think this is the big exciting bit for us. So they say they want a transformation of the economic system. It's not enough to talk about an energy transition. We propose a model aligned with planetary boundaries and with goals for degrowth, a model that reduces demand and excessive consumption and promotes solidarity-based circular and restorative economies. We condemn the negative impacts associated with the technocratic paradigm, such as pressure on water resources, electricity generation for data centers, and increasing mining for the production of cars and electric vehicles, among many other social and ecological impacts. The idea of a just energy transition, although presented as a solution to the environmental crisis, often perpetuates the current model, benefiting large corporations and countries in the global north while imposing disproportionate costs on the global south. I'll pause there. I mean, among the many cool things, including saying degrowth is good, I do like that they complain about electricity generation for data centers, a thing that I'm constantly complaining about on the internet.
Yeah.
So just glad that the bishops are also complaining about it.
Yeah, it's great. It is bad for everybody. It's and it contributes to all the other problems like water and drought and whatever. You can't have electricity generation for data centers without the use of water, the exploitation of water, and so on.
Yeah, and I think too the connection to this just transition, like you said earlier, that requires the green technology or whatever that we have requires things like lithium and cobalt and all these other minerals, and the idea that like we're basically destroying the lives of people in the Congo or Bolivia or other kinds of places with these minerals so that, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg can like keep harassing you to use Meta AI every time your uncle shares like a Minions meme is so bizarre. And I think it's good that they're right at the beginning of kind of the big AI craze, trying to draw out those material connections. In a lot of ways, it's a recovery of that more systemic economic analysis that liberation theology had, but also that the bishops often had in the global south in the 20th century. Like if you read the 1968 document from Salam, the bishops who met together in Colombia in Medellin, they were trying to take stock of what's going on in Latin America. And at that time, they had done this really impressive kind of analysis of how capitalism kind of pulls in the economies of Latin America to make them dependent on what's going on in the global north. And it's cool to see the bishops in the 21st century across the global south, again, kind of discovering some of those like important economic tools that like, when they're building data centers in the US or Canada or somewhere else, Ireland or whatever, they're also kind of creating consequences on the global south. And that's a cool thing to see so explicitly in a document like this one.
Totally. And I mean, it goes, that's true. And then there's also sort of like a wider sort of material way that that's happening as well. Like generating a lot of electricity for data centers. I mean, generating a lot of electricity for economic growth in general is the norm, right? That's just the way it works. But then data centers kind of exacerbate that because you have to even make more electricity for something completely made up so that the robot can tell you how to write your resume or whatever for a job. And then the same robot can read your resume for the job on the other side or whatever. But like that just means like more and more like energy production is needed, and then the just transition necessitates again the extraction of particular types of rare earth metals from the global south or whatever, or damming up another river so that there can be more electricity production as well. So it's just like there's so much going on here. I love the idea though of rejecting the whole idea of the energy transition.
Yeah.
You don't need a just energy transition. You need the abolition of capitalism. I am so sold on this idea.
Yeah, it's great. Speaking of that, I'll read the next bit. So they say, energy projects currently underway frequently displace communities and destroy ecosystems, exacerbating inequalities. Furthermore, the growing rhetoric that the solution lies in expanding mining, especially for the extraction of minerals considered critical and rare earths, is ecologically unsustainable, unjust, and predatory. It reinforces colonial extractivism, transforms entire territories into sacrifice zones, violates human rights, and devastates nature in the name of false sustainability. It's urgent to abandon an economic model that proposes infinite growth on a finite planet, and to this end exploits people and resources without limit. There's an urgent need to move towards a regenerative and distributive economic model that recognizes the ecological limits of the planet and places care for life at its center, replacing the extractivist logic with an economy of well-being and care for our common home. I'll stop there. There's a little bit more, but anything there really jumping out at you, Matt?
It's just all good. I don't know what to say about it, really. It is the type of language that you would just like it. I guess the thing that I keep coming back to over and over again is that, you might hear this type of language from more like liberal people, or I guess people who are not calling for a complete sort of structural economic change or something. People use this type of language all the time, especially about care as kind of like running cover for themselves or something. But I guess it just like it hits harder knowing what they actually intend by care, or like what the parameters of care are in this sense. I really appreciate that. That it's like it's not just sort of like, yeah, it's not sort of hollow sort of green capitalist stuff that might sound nice, but is actually devastating to the communities of the global south. It's like something pretty radical, and it makes me groan less, and my eyes are not rolling like they would probably usually.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, like we've talked about on this show in the past too, things like green projects like solar panels or whatever, they often push people off their land, especially farmers and so on, to build solar farms. And it's not like they're going to push, people living in gated communities off their land to build solar farms. So lots of good questions about kind of how green energy covers over continuing the kind of violence of capitalism. All right. They close by saying, we therefore demand production and consumption policies that transform production cycles and consumer culture, making them increasingly fair and ensuring that economic and energy transitions do not perpetuate inequalities or compromise human rights or the environment. Decentralized and democratic energy systems with community management and rooted in local territories represent an alternative consistent with the principles of integral ecology. They promote socio-environmental justice, energy sovereignty, and local resilience, provided they're accompanied by public policies aimed at the common good. So here they start kind of finally filling out a little bit more of the positive solution. But I think that decentralization even and the democratization of energy systems is a really interesting point and fits into lots of other conversations around things like agroecology and the sorts of subsidiarity model that Catholicism has promoted. What you kind of see is a really interesting degrowth socialist experiment getting articulated here, even if that's not the exact language on offer.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about the use of the sort of community management idea, or the more sort of decentralized energy systems. This has been a big thing that people have been thinking about in Scotland as, I don't know, we try to figure out the the energy transition here, whatever that might look like. And a really frustrating thing that kind of comes up time and time again is like, people are always arguing about nationalization of the energy grid and, all of that kind of stuff, right? Or like, for example, there is like an ongoing campaign for the town that's right across the river from us. There are plans to put up big windmills over there, and some people are saying we don't want them because they look bad or whatever. So whatever, who cares? But
the windy NIMBYs.
But like the
windy NIMBYs.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that, the windy NIMBYs. But like the larger question is like, who owns any of that stuff and who controls any of that stuff? And I think that like, nationalization often gets kind of like worked out at the highest levels. Like we think of nationalization, as like the federal government or something owning the electricity grid or whatever. But there are other ways to work out nationalization at smaller sort of decentralized scales that are oftentimes kind of forgotten about or just like left unconsidered. Like, could a local council or local town or, whatever, insert sort of scale and body here, could they own their own electricity system? Could they, like, especially if it's something like windmills, if it's something like solar panels, does it have to be sort of like administrated by a state? Could it be figured out in a different way? These are all great questions that I think are really at the core of like how we deal with electricity kind of moving forward. Yeah, I don't know. Excited to see some of this worked out here, though.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of rural electricity grids were already built by cooperatives or are cooperatively owned and things like
Yeah,
that.
right.
Similar to like how, weirdly enough, there's lots of credit unions and stuff left in rural communities. So there's like a history of that that is not unusual. But yeah, the drive to privatize everything is a constant threat. I think what's really fascinating about the kind of like the seeds of an alternative vision in a document like this is that it gives you like just enough to pull a lot of people into that historic coalition that they're talking about, but it also doesn't overdetermine it per se, so you can kind of find your way into the criticism and the proposal that they're putting on offer from a bunch of different strands or a bunch of different sources. Degrowth is one of them. I think those kinds of sustainable development people who are on the left, hard to do, but they're out there. You find their way into that same kind of conversation. There's a sort of like a coalition building piece here that I think is really impressive. So you can end up being a person who cares a lot about like rural electricity capacity or whatever. You could be a person who cares a lot about like farming. You could be a person who cares about, I don't know, like local autonomy, regional assemblies, and so on, and kind of figure out how you fit into this kind of vision. And I think that is the genius of a document like this. We mentioned at the beginning, it was released before COP30, when all these global leaders are going to get together and basically not do a good job of committing to the kind of real stuff we need to do to stop climate change from destroying us. And I think what's fascinating about releasing a document like this is that there's a kind of affirmation that we could nevertheless use that event as an opportunity to build our own kind of movements, our own kind of capacities and structures. And that's the sort of thing that, feels like it's getting invited even through those concrete proposals.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what I'm hearing is that you're giving us the leftist case for states' rights. So interesting, Dean.
I mean, maybe that's fine. Whatever. Just a leftist case for not destroying the planet. And if it means that, I don't know, you should have some subsidiarity going on, I would say that's probably fine. Though I don't think subsidiarity is reducible to states' rights. More like local community rights.
Yeah, that sounds good. States' rights, but not racist, is maybe a big one to figure out. Yeah, I don't know, Dean. The whole thing is very cool. It's a document like of which I've never seen before. Like of which? What am I saying? But it is like super exciting to see a big group of bishops come together like this and give this type of guidance to people at COP. I mean, again, it will be ignored in a really frustrating way, and people at COP will do something extremely marginal, and they'll be like, we've done it again, we've copped it. But I think it's great as a document that sort of sets a particular tone for how we should be thinking about climate change and sort of like the social and economic aspects of that question. This is really great. Man, I would love to see Protestants do a single thing that's this good. That'd be cool. That'd be cool and uplifting. I mean, for how progressive some Protestant denominations are, they're usually not calling for the abolition of capitalism or the suspicion about green capitalism or something. Just it's not done.
Yeah,
I think probably especially in more progressive denominations, it's not done because green capitalism is like, the one thing they like.
Yeah, either that or they are doing that, but they're doing it through their international coalitions or at the World Council of Churches or like the kind of global institutions, which is often incredible. I mean, I think for people who don't know, the World Council of Churches is extremely cool. I mean, not without their faults or whatever, but like they have so many really amazing initiatives, including like extremely explicit attempts to rethink the economic system and also think about how to organize around it. Like, I don't know, they're doing a lot of good stuff out there. It's just that I think that, Protestants suffer from or benefit from, I don't know, whatever you think, but they don't have the same advantage maybe where Catholics have a really identifiable public voice or spokespeople. When we have bishops who are in charge of a diocese and they wear a collar and all that kind of stuff, you can kind of point to those people and be like, well, that's the moral authority of the tradition speaking. Whereas when the World Council of Churches says something, it doesn't have the same weight or power. But
Right.
I often feel like I wish Protestants spent more time actually engaging the institutions they already have, because a lot of them are extremely far down the road, further than the Catholics in many respects, and require maybe less compromises if you're a progressive person. And nevertheless, they don't really make their way into the pews. So we need a big Protestant version of this, and I think they could do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually, now that you say it that way. That's like, the the minister or the priest or whatever, depending on what kind of Protestant church you go to, will be like, hey, stay after at the coffee hour and hear about what's going on about this, at this national committee. And then no one will do it because
Right.
you got to go home and watch American football or something. But I guess it's true. It's true. It exists, but it's not working its way down in a meaningful way.
Yeah, it's funny because this is maybe a tangent at the very end, but here in Canada, for example, the Catholic Church, I feel like you can really get a lot of Catholics who just go to mass to sign a piece of paper saying they don't like capitalism or whatever, and that's great. Or, I mean, maybe not that. You can get them to sign a paper saying that mining companies should be held accountable for the violence they do, all that kind of stuff. But you can run a grassroots campaign in parishes in a way that Protestants don't. Or don't as effectively maybe. But there's a kind of funny irony because, for example, the United Church of Canada, which is the biggest Protestant denomination in the country, they have an extremely impressive global solidarity movement, or global solidarity network is maybe a better way of putting it. We've talked to Jim Hodgson on the show. We've talked to some other people of the United Church over time on the show in the past. And I'm often I'll have people who are members of the United Church talking to me about how cool it is that the Catholic Church is so busy, doing so much cool stuff. And I'll always be like, yeah, I don't know, your church is also doing a ton of cool stuff. You should just do that. It's just a strange thing. I don't know why that kind of cultural gap exists, but there's a lot of untapped potential within Protestants if they could maybe not externalize the action through the institution. I don't know, not trying to give advice to churches I don't go to, but it seems to me like an opportunity that could be taken up.
It's good advice, whether people want to take it or not. I think that makes sense. Well, there you have it, folks. The big group of bishops from the global south, they said that degrowth is good. They said that the transition away from capitalism is good. They said that green capitalism is bad. These are cool things that are happening, and I sure hope the weird policy wonks that end up at COP30, their hearts are strangely warmed, just like John Wesley, and they have a big conversion away from doing stupid things that are less than a half measure. Anyways, yeah, Dean, any last thoughts before we turn the podcast off?
Maybe the last thought is the reminder that the document is an invitation to a historic coalition. And I think that's the thing that I hope people go away with, figuring out how do we respond to that coalition in a good way from the global north, and what does that commit us to between now and November for COP30, and after that to build a different situation altogether.
Sounds good. I'm pulling the big lever that says podcast, and I'm switching it to the off position. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. If you do support us there, you get an invite to our cool Discord channel where you can talk about things. Mostly, a lot of memes today. Some good memes in there. That's nice. People are talking about exercising. People are talking about starting other Discord channels, which is great. May 1,000 Discords bloom. That's always nice. Lots of good stuff going on in our Discord. Always a great group of people that you can know and be amongst. And isn't that nice? Our intro music is by Amaria Armstrong. Our outro music is by The Logical Spoon. And we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jack said